The first shot bore into one's chest. The second caught the other's knee and forced him to fall into the open. The third shot followed the second and caught the man straight through his skull. The sentinel was already moving. She'd pay for the action, but it was the best move amongst a bunch of shitty choices. The sentinel had brought its mangled arm up and now sent it careening down into Pen's outstretched grip to disarm her. She only had time to shift her left hand over her right. Still, the blow caught her hard. Pain erupted in her left hand as bones fractured and shattered. The gun clattered to the ground. Pen slammed her right foot into the side of the sentinel. It barely registered the attack, but its only real purpose was to send Pen into a rollout of its reach. She came out of the roll and forced herself to her feet. Her left hand was throbbing waves of nauseating pain, but with her right, she pulled her hatchet from her hip and readied the weapon. The sentinel straightened, noted its dead allies, and looked at the gun on the floor before kicking it far away. It looked at her and let out another deep buzzing sound. Without warning, it lunged forward, incredibly quick for its weight. Pen went under its attempted grapple and passed it on its left. As she passed, she brought her hatchet high-ripping into its armpit joint. She then dropped to the ground and brought the hatchet into the back of its left knee. Neither strike disabled anything, but she felt the softer material of the joints give. They took damage. Again, though, she paid for her actions. As she brought the hatchet out of its leg, it was already spinning around on her. That mangled right arm clipped the side of her head as she only half-successfully dodged to the side. Despite her protection and an indirect hit, her vision flashed white with the impact. Ringing and nausea came quickly as she stumbled away from the machine. It didn't allow her to put distance between them, though, closing the gap and striking her. Its left arm rocketed into her chest, cracking against the armor with hydraulic force. Snaking cracks formed in the armor piece, and shards of plating flew outward. Pen's feet left the ground and she was sent flying back a few meters before ragdolling to the ground, rolling side over side. It was all she could do to keep hold of her hatchet. Her ears were ringing, her stomach was turning. Perhaps the only thing keeping her from retching inside her helmet was her body prioritizing gasping desperately for air after that strike had ripped it all from her lungs. As her vision returned to her, she found herself staring at the concrete floor. The ringing also subsided, and she could hear stomping metal steps approaching. She pushed herself up to her hands and knees, and then to her feet, stumblingly. Once again, it was closing on her. Without thought or hesitation, it struck out again with its left. She could see the blow coming. A focus cut through her blurring vision. The ringing was gone. It was quiet. She could feel her heart beating, pounding in her chest. Breath came to her. This thing she faced thought faster than her. It moved faster, too. And yet at this moment, Pen wasn't really thinking at all. She watched as if her entire body started to move on some autonomic level. Her right leg stepped back and she dropped herself low. It would react, redirect its strike to follow her. She couldn't block it either, not with the force this thing would strike with. She didn't need to, though. As its arm came around and down, she held the hatchet in her hand and struck up into its forearm. She couldn't block the strike, but she could redirect it. Dropping low and to the right and striking its arm was just enough to keep its blow from connecting. Its arm sailed over her head and off to her left. She saw it. She realized what she was doing. Its neck was exposed and she had a moment to strike before it could recover from its compromised position. She adjusted her grip on her hatchet, brought her left hand against its overextended left arm, and lanced up and out with the hatchet. Shit. The curved steel edge bit into metal as the sentinel quickly brought its chin down into its chest. The hatchet sparked against its featureless faceplate. The droning buzz taunted her. It knew just as well as she did that failing to connect with such a strike left her in a terrible position. It brought its left arm back across, batting her arms to the side, and then back again, catching her neck in its grip. It lifted her effortlessly off her feet. She could feel her air supply dwindle, but more than that, She could feel its cold hand tear into her. It wasn't trying to asphyxiate her. There was no need. That was a byproduct of it simply beginning to crush her neck. She drove her hatchet up into its left shoulder joint. Its buzzing droning sounded out. Its task was nearly completed. Frantically. Again and again she struck. She could feel the compression. She could hear it even. Featureless and emotionless as it was, it almost seemed proud. With a desperate force, she brought the hatchet up once last time. The socket gave. Some weaker material was cleaved, and blue electricity arced out. The sentinel's grip released, its arm spasming as it dropped its prey. Penelope hit the ground roughly, but kept a hold of her weapon lodged as it was into the armpit of the machine. She used it as an anchor point, pushing the thing around, forcing it around to face away from her, before wrenching her hatchet out. Without thought, she dropped and drew the hatchet across the back of its left knee as she'd done previously. Weakened as it was, this strike managed real damage. She almost smiled with satisfaction as she felt the ripping and tearing of vital soft mechanics. Whatever the mechanism it needed to keep a functioning joint failed, and it dropped to that knee. As it fell, Pen rose up. She planted one foot onto its hip and wrapped her left arm around its head. Bringing herself up onto it, she let all her weight hand from that point, forcing its head back slightly. Slightly, though, was enough. Her right hand gripped the hatchet tight. Pen brought the edge up, around, and down into its exposed neck. Again. Again. She was unrelenting. Her left hand screamed in pain, but she forced it to do as she bade, to hold fast. She cleaved into the vulnerable point, each strike biting deeper than the last. With another strike, she cleaved deep enough that, as she pulled the hatchet out, it tore soft plastics with it. She hacked once again, but this time, instead of drawing the weapon back out the way it had gone in, she ripped it out to the side. Chunks of vital material were torn out with it. Electricity arced out from the deepening gash. Another strike, and she felt her blade stick between two nodes of some sort of mechanical spinal column. She wrenched her hatchet down before ripping it out again, hoping to wedge the thing apart. Its mangled right arm flailed wildly. With one final hacking strike, Penelope felt a give and a grinding pop.
Rah!
She screamed as she ripped the hatchet out to the right and twisted the head to the left with her left arm. Its droning buzz sounded frantic as Pen tore its head clean from its shoulders. Sparks and machine fragments flew from the stump as its torso fell forward to the ground. Pen, mounted as she was, followed it to the ground, but caught herself on 2 feet. She gripped her hatchet in her right hand and the head of the decapitated machine in her left. She gave its featureless face a single glance before spiking it onto the floor. Retribution. At once, everything came back to her. The pain in her hand, head, and chest returned, joined by a searing pain in her joints. Every muscle in her body ached, or worse. Blood rushed in her ears, joined by ringing. She panted for air, ready to collapse to the floor. She was about to drop, but noticed something that kept her up. The adrenaline rush returning, or at least preparing to. At the door stood 2 figures. Her mind went to her hatchet. The distance was impossible, but she'd rush them. It was all she could do. Maybe she'd weave between the crates and force them to waste ammunition. She readied her hatchet, but stopped there. They weren't moving, nor were they even aiming rifles at her. No, their weapons were pointed at the floor. They looked almost stunned. She recognized finally the color of their gear. Gray urban camo. Friendlies.
Hey everyone, hope you loved the video. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit subscribe for more awesome sci-fi content. You can also support us by hitting the thanks button or becoming a channel member. Your generosity helps us bring you more stellar stories. Every bit counts. Thanks a bunch.